Well, I never thought that I would be making a video about my own personal experience of taking a psychedelic drug, and yet here I am. So I am literally the last person in the world who you would expect to take a mind-altering drug. I've always hated drugs. I hate what they do to people. I was never curious about experimenting with drugs, and it's just something I've always kind of run away from. And yet, last November, I went to Amsterdam specifically to take a psychedelic drug, which was psilocybin, or magic mushrooms. And you might be wondering why on earth that I agreed to do that. And the reason is that there is a lot of hype around magic mushrooms at the moment. There's some really promising research coming through about its incredible effects in treating lots of different mental health disorders like drug-resistant depression and PTSD and addictions. And it was something I've been following for a few years, ever since I learned about it at a medical conference in the US a few years ago. I've been following it avidly, but never really thought it was something that I would take because I wasn't brave enough, and also I didn't suffer from a mental disorder. And just the thought of handing over control of my mind is just not something that appealed to me at all. And then what happened was I was approached by a thought leader in this area of plant medicine last year, and he wanted to come on my podcast, Wellness Unwrapped, and talk about this whole subject of psychedelic drugs and plant medicine. And I thought about it very carefully, and I decided that I would talk about this because I think it's really, really important to spread the word, but I would only talk about it if I first took it myself and then gave a very honest account of what it was like. So I announced to my family that I would be taking magic mushrooms, which came as a hell of a shock, I can tell you, to my family, because my kids were totally bewildered, because ever since they've been in primary school, I've been telling them, stay away from drugs, stay away from drugs. And then suddenly they hear that I'm tootling off to Amsterdam to take a psychedelic drug. So there was some really awkward conversations at home, I can tell you, and especially when with my two oldest kids. My boys are in their early 20s, and one of them really was not impressed at all. He was saying, it's really irresponsible, Mum, and it's dangerous, and what if you come back and you think you're a plant pot? And I was saying, well, you just need to look at the research. John Hopkins University is doing research on smoking cessation with psilocybin, and there's this research and that research, and it's safe and it's non-toxic and it's non-addictive, and look at this diagram of what happens to the brain and building new neurons, etc., etc. And by the time I went, I was completely confident that this was a safe thing to do. I was doing it in a way that was legal and very properly supported by a very, very skilled therapist, and I'd done lots of preparation beforehand. So I kind of skipped off to Amsterdam, really excited that I was going to have this profound, life-changing, transcendent experience that I had read about, that everyone else had had, where they got this download about their kind of meaning of life, etc., etc. I was really excited. And what actually happened was I had the most horrendous experience. It was one of the most unpleasant experiences I've ever had in my entire life, and difficult to describe really, but I didn't have any hallucinations, didn't have any downloads, nothing like that. But what I did have, it was as if someone had put a bomb in my nervous system, and I felt like I'd been poisoned. At one point, I actually said, I think I need to go to hospital. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I felt hugely panicked, and I would have given anything at all at that point to have been able to turn back the clock and to not have taken those mushrooms. It was that bad. Anyway, I came back to Manchester, very relieved to be home safe and sound with my family, and I started getting severe heart palpitations, having never had heart palpitations before going to Amsterdam. And that was really frightening. It got to the point where I thought, I'm actually going to go and see a cardiologist. It was that bad. And that went on for 10 days. And the only reason it stopped at 10 days is I had to get help. And it was actually Reiki that sorted it in the end, and that kind of reset my nervous system. But I'm someone that has a lot of self-calming tools in my toolbox. I'm trained in a lot of things that calm the nervous system, but I couldn't fix this. This was so extreme that I could not fix this by myself. And one of the people who I spoke to in that period was a clinical psychologist who's part of the clinical trials that are currently going on with psilocybin here in the UK. And I asked her if there was something wrong with me. Like, why didn't I have this positive experience? Why was I having heart palpitations, and was I weird in some way? And she said, you're absolutely not weird. She said, the problem is, Susie, that all people are hearing are these incredible life-changing positive experience. That's all people are hearing, so one-sided. And she said, look, this research is really, really promising, but it's at a really early stage, really early, and we just can't make these huge claims yet. We just don't have the data. We don't understand these plant medicines. They are really powerful. We don't understand how they work, okay? And she was very concerned that there were a lot of commercial interest coming in, there were a lot of retreats opening up, and maybe done with the best intentions, but she was worried that people who were suffering with their mental health and who were very vulnerable would be sucked in thinking that this would be the answer to all their problems, because I think that's how it's being promoted. There's a lot of what's called rainbow washing, that it's like magic mushrooms are the answer to absolutely anything and everything. And you look at documentaries on Netflix, there's even a series on Netflix with Nicole Kidman about psilocybin. That's how mainstream this has got. And in fact, one thing I saw the weekend I got from back from Amsterdam, there was a whole section in the Times weekend supplement that weekend. And it said on the front cover, want to improve your marriage? Magic mushrooms. And there it was, big article about how fabulous it is to go to the Netherlands and on this retreat and take mushrooms, and you come back and your life is much better. And I just feel that we need some nuance in this discussion that is just not there at the moment. I think that I am still massively pro mushrooms, every bit as much pro mushrooms as I was before I took them and had this horrible experience. And after all, look, I'm talking about a sample of one person and one experience, so I can't conclude anything at all from what happened to me. And it's very likely that if I were to take that, even the same dose again, that I would have a very different experience. I mean, the point is, you just never know, because it's wildly unpredictable. You don't know what's going to surface, you don't know what's going to come up, how you're going to react. And I think that we need a lot more honesty and balance about that, because yes, you can go up and have this incredible transcendent experience, or you can go down. And if you are somewhere where you're not supported by a very skilled therapist who can help you through this and help you integrate whatever happens, I think it's really quite frightening what people will go through. And I think it's irresponsible to not give a much more rounded picture. And I think I would have been really irresponsible to do what I was planning to do, because I had already kind of scripted in my head I was going to have this amazing life-changing experience, and I was going to talk about it on the podcast and talk about how this is the future of treating depression, blah, blah, blah. And now I look back and think, I am so grateful that I had this awful experience. I'm so relieved it was me and not someone else, because I think that people would have listened to that podcast, and people listen all over the world, and some of them might have been inspired to get hold of some magic mushrooms and, you know, have their own fabulous experience. And I shudder to think what might have happened to them. I really, really do shudder. So I'm so glad that the podcast episode I have ended up with, although it's not the one that I planned at all, I think it's the right one. And I really wish that I had listened to that conversation before I decided to go to Amsterdam. And I will say that I do think there have been some positive effects that I talk about in the podcast. I'm not going to go into it here. So I wanted to kind of let it settle, let it integrate before I talked about this publicly. And you can hear about that perspective and how I think it has benefited me in the podcast. But I really feel that I dodged a bullet by not doing what I was planning to. Although I was doing it with the best intentions of bringing this to the world and helping people, I think it was really dangerous. And it was really brought home to me when I spoke to a client just before I went to Amsterdam, someone I was coaching, and I told her where I was going, and she said, wow, like I always thought that magic mushrooms were just for hippies, and I have seen people on Instagram and they were raving about magic mushrooms, but they were just so far out. They were just out there. They were in Bali or Costa Rica, and they were just nothing like me. That's what she told me. But she said, Susie, you are so normal. You're just so normal. And if you are doing this, it makes me think that I could too. And at the time, I thought that was a really positive thing. Now I think very differently about that. And the next time I spoke to her, which was obviously after I'd been to Amsterdam, she came on the Zoom call all excited and she said, tell me, what was it like? Did you get an amazing download? And did you have this spiritual experience? Did you find out the meaning of life? And I was like, no, none of that. And I told her what had actually happened. And she told me that after the previous conversation, she'd actually gone away and researched magic mushrooms and decided it was something she was open to. And bear in mind, this is someone who works for the NHS. She's extremely research focused. She wants to know about trials and about concrete results. And all she found was very, very positive, to the point that she thought that maybe it was something for her. And it just underlined for me how there is so much buzz and hype and positive PR, and I don't think we're hearing the other side. And that's why I feel really, really strongly about coming on here and telling people what happened to me, because I think it can happen to anybody. And it's easy to think that you can find happiness and enlightenment through this very easy shortcut of taking some mushrooms in a yurt in someone's back garden, and suddenly your life will be amazing. And I think that is a very, very dangerous message to put out there. So I really hope that if you are someone who is kind of intrigued by this area, that you will listen to the full story on the podcast, which I think is very balanced and very nuanced. And if you know someone who is kind of also thinking about this, please tag them here, and let's get a bit more honesty out about this. So I hope this is of help, and thank you for watching.